Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited for tonight's worship because we will be culminating with our series entitled Rise to the Challenge. And we've been learning from the life of Joseph. We remember that he was sold by his brothers. They didn't like him. They sold him to the merchants going to Egypt. And then when he was there in Egypt already, he was sold to Potiphar. And he served as a slave in the house of Potiphar. But during the time, the wife of Potiphar liked him, and so she tempted him. But Joseph rose to the challenge because he lived with a God-centered morality. And we learned that out of that challenge that he faced, though he overcame it, he was put into prison because he was accused of something that he didn't do. He suffered for something that he did not commit. And while he was in prison, he met two individuals, the cupbearer of the palace and the chief baker. And we learned that he interpreted their dreams, and out of that situation, he was brought to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh had his dream also. And when he had this dream, he called for all his magicians and wise men, but nobody could interpret his dream. And when he was called, Pharaoh told him, "Somebody told me that you could interpret dreams." And Joseph said, "It is not me, but it is my God who gives me the interpretations." And out of that scenario, we said that he rose to the challenge because he had a God-centered discernment. He made his decisions out of the point of reference and the very person of the God that he worshiped. But that didn't end the story in that way. Joseph became the leader of Egypt. Now he was leading, but out of that interpretation that he gave in the dream of Pharaoh, you remember it, right? He had a dream about fat cows that were eaten by ugly cows, good grains that were eaten by ugly grains. And Joseph interpreted that dream, saying to him that God is revealing to you something. God wanted to let you know that in the land of Egypt there will be a 7-year of abundance and a 7-year of famine. And Joseph made his recommendation to him that you need to appoint someone who's going to be the leader of the land. And Pharaoh looked at his wise men and the magicians, and Pharaoh said, "There is nothing among them that I could see, as wise as you are, and because God has endowed to you this wisdom, I am going to appoint you to become the ruler of Egypt next to me." And Joseph was there already at the top of the leadership in the land of Egypt when the abundance that was predicted through the dream of Pharaoh came. And so he stocked food, a lot of grains. They gathered all of it for 7 years. And then, after that years of abundance, the famine came. But the story, when you look at the text that we will be delving at this evening, we will notice that the famine did not only occur in the land of Egypt, but also it happened in the land of Canaan. Canaan was the place where the parent of Joseph was living. His father, Jacob, was there. And his siblings, those individuals who sent him or sold him to the merchants, were also living in Canaan. And they were so much affected by the famine. And as I have told you, when a famine would occur in that land, there will be no rain, not only for months, but for years, sometimes even 10 years without a rain. That will cause all the plants to die. Nothing will grow from the ground. And when there are no plants and no water, no animals would survive. And so if you imagine that kind of scenario, no human beings would survive also. And it happened not only in Egypt, it happened in the land of Canaan. And while they were there, they were experiencing all these things. Jacob looked at his children and told them, "Are you going to just stare at each other here without anything to eat? Why don't you go to Egypt? Because somebody told us that there is grain in Egypt, there is food in Egypt." And he commanded 10 of his children to go to Egypt and buy food for the family. And so if you think about this scenario, this took place 21 years later after they sold Joseph. 21 years have passed already. And Joseph, I believe, was already able to move on from all those troubles that he had gone through from the past. Why did I say that? I would like us to look at Genesis chapter 41, and you will see there that he had 2 children, and he named the first child Manasseh. And if you look at that name, the meaning of that name Manasseh is actually, God has made me forget all my troubles. God has made me forget all my troubles. And he had another child. He named him Ephraim. And he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. If you notice in the meanings of these two names, there is a sense of difficulty that would speak about his past. The word trouble and the word affliction. In the name Manasseh, Joseph was saying, God has caused my trouble to be forgotten, or God has caused me to forget my troubles. And in the name Ephraim, there is a meaning that brings the idea of affliction, that in the midst of that place of affliction, he was able to become fruitful by the help of the Almighty. Now look at that. He named his two children with those names. That is giving an idea of the end of his troublesome years. Now it's time for him to celebrate. Now it was time for him to enjoy life because all those troubles are already behind him. And yun sana yung time nag-move on na siya. But something happened. As I have told you earlier, Jacob told his children, are you just going to stare at each other here? Why don't you go to Egypt? And so his brothers, the brothers of Joseph, left Canaan and they traveled going to Egypt to buy food. Lo and behold, this guy who already moved on from his past was there selling all the grains, leading and taking care of every person working in Egypt. And while he was there, his brothers came. How would you like that scenario? Wherein for 21 years you have had troublesome years, and the things that your brothers did to you were there in your brain. You can see them. You can see them destroying your reputation. You can see them destroying your person before you sleep during the night. You can imagine the well where they have placed you in before you close your eyes during the night. You can imagine their faces when they gave you to the merchants to sell you so that you will be brought to Egypt. You can imagine all those faces, all those taunting moments, all those difficult situations before you close your eyes. And for 21 years, God finally put an end to it. Supposedly, nag-move on ka na, but suddenly you saw them again. How would you feel that? Diba, minsan okay na yung life mo and there's the person that committed a mistake to you. He offended you and you see him again and it makes you recall everything that was done to you. And that happened to Joseph. And so he was confronted by his brothers. He confronted them and he told them, you are spies. I think he was trying to do something here, trying to orchestrate things here as he approached his brothers, and he told them, you are spies in our land. You are trying to look at some areas that are weak in our land so you could report to your boss probably and then maybe someday attack our land. And he was accusing them about this matter. And when they heard that, look at the response of his brothers. I want us to look at Genesis chapter 42. Chapter 42 verses 6 to 9. When Joseph looked at them, Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize Joseph. Maybe you would ask why. Why did Joseph recognize them? Because they were wearing similar clothes back 21 years ago when Joseph saw them, because they were still shepherds. So if you were shepherds 21 years ago, you will be wearing the same clothes this time because you are still shepherds. But if they look at Joseph, they wouldn't be able to recognize him anymore because he was a shepherd like them 21 years ago. But this time, he was a ruler of Egypt. So you wouldn't recognize someone who has reached so much in his life. And besides, he was still very young that time. And this 17-year-old was Joseph when he was sold by his brothers. And this time, when his brothers visited Egypt, 21 years later, he was already around 38 or 39-year-old. A lot of things changed in the physical appearance of Joseph, I believe. But more than anything was his clothing and the way he brought himself, no longer as a shepherd, but this time as a ruler in the land. So they were not able to recognize him. But Joseph recognized them. And so Joseph told them, you must be spies. And look at their response to Joseph in Genesis chapter 42, verse 11. We are all sons of one man, they said. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. Now, I want you to take note of that statement. We are honest men. And if I was in the shoes of Joseph, I would tell myself and I would just converse with him and I would say the words, "Are you kidding me? Are you sure about what you're claiming? You're honest men? Do you remember when you sold me? What did you tell our father when you brought back my clothes? Did you tell him that you sold me?" Definitely they didn't tell their father that they sold him. And Joseph, I believe, thought of a story that was created by his brothers when they went back to their father. And even though he didn't know that story that they have crafted, but the Bible would tell us that when they went back to their father, they said, "This is the cloth of your son. Do you recognize it?" And then Jacob thought that he was killed or slaughtered by an animal. And that was the thing that they reported to their father. They didn't tell the whole story. And that would give us an idea that these brothers of Joseph were all liars. And so when they said, "We're not spies, we're honest men." And when Joseph heard that, I believe in his heart he was saying, "Are you kidding me? You're liars." Though he didn't say those words to them. And then they continued with the conversation. And what happened next was this in verse 13 of chapter 42. The Bible says, "But they said, 'Your servants are 12 brothers in all, and the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, our youngest is with our father today.'" And listen to these words, "And one is no longer alive." You were moving on already. God has caused you to forget all your troubles in the past when suddenly your brothers who did that wrong thing to you appeared in your life, and now they're claiming that they are honest men. And what would you feel when you realize that your family, the closest people in the planet, are actually thinking that there is no more you existing on the planet Earth? That must be very painful in the heart of Joseph. I was telling early this morning, when I preached on the same message, I told the people, nagagalit nga si Mrs. pag hindi mo maalala ang birthday. Birthday mo lang yun. Kaya nga sabi ko sa Bisaya, if you forgot your wife's birthday, ayaw na lang kag-uli, kay girahon gyud ka. Yun pa. Your existence is totally perceived as gone. You are dead in the mind of your family. How would you feel that? Nag-move on ka na sana. But they appeared and they said they were honest men and they were expressing to you that there is no more Joseph existing on the planet Earth. Joseph must have felt so bad during this time, but he was trying to hold his emotions. You know what? When he was tempted, he rose to the challenge by living a God-centered morality. When he was faced or confronted by the dreams and he needed to interpret them, and Pharaoh asked him that he heard about him interpreting dreams, he said, "No, it's not me, but it's my God who interprets dreams." What he was saying is that he had a God-centered discernment. Now, he was challenged this time in a different aspect, because the challenge that confronted him was not in the outer sense, but it was in the inner sense. Because the challenge that he was facing this time is something that you and I can relate. Every one of us, we experience this. We can relate with this because we were created as emotional beings. We have emotions, we feel, we become upset, we become angry, we become happy at times, we become so sad at one moment. We experience being an emotional being. We know that. We can feel this, what he is going through. And Joseph's challenge this time was not in the outer, it was inside him. And I believe often, when we are challenged deep within, it is harder than when we are challenged in the outer sense. Joseph's challenge was deep inside his heart. How is he going to respond to this? When he was moving on already, when God caused him to forget the troubles already, how was he going to respond with this challenge that he was facing this time? And I was looking at this, I realized gradually that there is something that he believes in, something that he was holding on to, that I think you and I should also have in our lives, so that when we are confronted by emotional challenges in life, we would rise to the challenge. And this is it. So this time they were there already. Joseph saw them and they were claiming that they were honest, and they declared that their brother Joseph is already dead. And so Joseph was just holding the emotions deep inside when he told his brothers, okay, you can buy and then I will just let you go. But there is a condition. You need to leave one of you here in Egypt. And when you go home, never ever come back without bringing your younger brother. So 2 conditions. You live, you can buy grains, I would let you go, but one of you has to stay. I will let you go, and when you come back, never show your faces to me unless you bring your brother with you, your younger brother. And so they left. When they arrived there, Simeon wasn't with them already because Joseph took hold of him. And then they ate the grains that they bought. After a few days, few months later, the grains that they bought ran out already. They ate everything. And Jacob told them, so what are we going to do now? You need to go back to Egypt and buy some grains. They had some discussions when in fact Jacob said, you go. And then one of them said, we cannot just live without our brother because that ruler in Egypt told us already. If we will go back and buy some grains, we need to bring our younger brother with us. Unless we do that, then he will not entertain us, or probably he's going to do something to us. And so Jacob was left without any choice. And so he let Benjamin go with them. So they brought Benjamin. Now they were back to Egypt. When they were there, Joseph had another emotional struggle. What was that? Don't you know that Benjamin was the only person among his siblings who was born on the same mother with him? Yung iba niyang mga kapatid niya kalahati. Kapatid niya lang sa tatay. Benjamin was the only one who was whole na kapatid niya talaga both sa tatay and sa nanay. And they have not seen each other. Joseph did not see him for 21 years. If there is someone among your siblings that is so close to you, and you have been afar from each other for years, what are you supposed to do when you meet finally with each other? Definitely, if I were in his shoes, I would hug him. I would kiss him. I would spend much time to talk with him about the matters that I have gone through in life. But he couldn't do that. Have you experienced that? There is something that you really desire to do, but you can't do it. And there was the struggle deep within the heart of Joseph. And you know what he did? He just hid in his room and wept by himself. But after that time, he said, okay, you came here to buy grains. I'll release you with Simeon this time. I'll let you buy grains. I'll release you. But he told one of his servants, I want you to put my cup inside the sack of Benjamin. And so they placed the cup of Joseph in the sack of Benjamin, and they left. While they were moving, Joseph told one of his servants, I want you to run after them and check all their sacks. Once you find my cup inside that particular sack, the owner of that sack should come back to me, I mean. And so they ran after the siblings of Joseph, and when they were there already, they checked all the sacks from the oldest sibling sacks to the youngest. Wala silang nakita until umabot dun kay Benjamin. And the cup was there. And so all of them went back to Egypt because they didn't like to go home without Benjamin. Remember their conversation with their father earlier when Jacob told them, I already lost my son Joseph. Simeon is left in Egypt. Now if you will take away my son Benjamin and you will come back without him, I will die. And so they didn't like that to happen. That is why they went back to Egypt, all of them. And they made some negotiations with Joseph. But Joseph didn't like them to go. And he said to them, you can go home actually, all of you except Benjamin, because we got the cup from his sack. He can stay here with me and he's going to serve me as my slave. But they didn't like the idea. And so they made an appeal again, and they had this conversation, they had a discussion, until that time when one of his siblings mentioned to him, if you will not let our brother Benjamin go home with us, our father will die. Now the emotions there deep inside his heart was about to burst already. That is why when you look at chapter 45, something happened. Look at chapter 45, verses 1 to 3. Then Joseph could not control himself before all of those who stood by him, and he cried, "Have everyone go out of me." So he asked all his servants to go out of the room, and so there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he said to his brothers, he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. I am Joseph." And his brothers couldn't believe about the things that he said because they were also reminded about what they did to him. Joseph, that time to them, was like a ghost haunting them from the grave because they thought all the while that he's dead already. And now here comes the leader, one of the top-ranked leader of Egypt, is confronting them and saying that I am Joseph. And they were all scared about his claim. And you know what? They were all scared. But listen to what Joseph said in verses 4 to 9. "Please come closer to me," he said. And they came closer and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt." Pinaalala mo pa talaga na binenta ka namin. "Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." Now here is a statement that I want all of us to take note. In a statement of Joseph, he said, "You sold me, but God sent me." Those two statements are different perspectives. You sold me, but God sent me. What's the difference between the two? When you were sold as a slave, you are not like a person anymore. You don't have a value that a normal being should be valued in the way that a normal being should be valued. Why? Because you were sold as an object. You are no longer considered a person. You are an object because you were sold as a slave. But when you consider the statement "sent," that idea conveys that you are a representative, someone who has a mission, someone who has a purpose. So Joseph, when he was confronted by these emotions deep within inside him, he tried to deal with it by looking at these things in a different sense. Taking the different perspective. In an ordinary way, people would see it as he was being sold by his brothers, but Joseph saw it that he was sent by God, who was his master that time. You see the perspective that he was taking, and out of that perspective, we will be able to say that Joseph was living a life with a God-centered judgment about the things happening in his life. He was living with a God-centered judgment. He was confronted by a temptation. He was able to overcome it because he lived a life with a God-centered morality. He was confronted by dreams and he was asked to interpret it. His wisdom was challenged. And Pharaoh told him, "You were reported to be a wise man." But he said, "It is not my wisdom, it is my God's wisdom." He lived with a God-centered discernment. And now he was here confronted by an emotional problem, an issue deep within inside his heart. And he dealt with it properly because he was living with a God-centered judgment. In the way he looks at things around him, he judges matters with God at the center of it. He knew people would think, "You were sold, you don't have a value." But according to his perspective, I wasn't just sold, I was sent here as a representative of the Almighty in this land of Egypt. Look at that. And then after that conversation, he released his brothers and he told them, "I want you to bring our father back here. And I want all of you to live in Egypt." And so they went home, got Jacob. Jacob was old already during this time. And then they stayed in Goshen, a portion in the land of Egypt. And they lived there for many, many, many years. But the story didn't end there. Because Jacob this time was already old. That is why when you look at chapter 50 starts with a burial ceremony. Chapter 50 starts with a scenario that those verses in the earlier part of the chapter would show us that he was embalmed. They were mourning. They brought him to their cemetery that was purchased by their forefathers in the earlier account of the narrative. They were mourning. They were crying. This was a sad moment for them. After the burial, they all went home. They all went home, and the next thing that happened was this. Look at verse 12 onwards of chapter 50. Thus his sons did for him as he had charged them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham had bought along with a field for a burial site from Ephron of the Hittite. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt. He and his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's father, take note of verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was already dead, they said, "What if Joseph bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him?" Maybe Joseph is still holding a grudge against us. He wanted to kill us. He wanted revenge. But he wasn't doing it earlier because our father is still alive. But now he's dead already. I think we are all dead now. He's gonna kill us too if he holds a grudge against us. And they fabricated a story again this time. This was their solution. Thus, they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father charged before he died saying, 'Thus you shall say to Joseph, please forgive, I beg you, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father who wrong you. And now please forgive this transgression. Please forgive your brothers.'" And according to them, this was a message from Jacob, but actually not. They just fabricated that message. And then when they confronted Joseph, Joseph wept again. And listen to the statement that he mentioned in verse 20. Verse 20, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." They were scared that he would slaughter them, but Joseph didn't dwell on that grudge or that pain, that trouble that they caused all throughout his existence in the 21 years. He didn't take it against them because according to him, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." This is actually a similar statement in chapter 45 when he said, "You sold me, but God sent me. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." The point of the matter is this. Joseph, when he faced that inner challenge, the urge and the surge of emotions deep within inside his heart, trying to cause him to do something against his brothers, he was able to manage it. By what way? By having a God-centered judgment. Because he saw things differently from the way his brothers saw it. They thought they did evil to him, but Joseph thought God was actually doing something good out of that evil. They thought that they sold Joseph, but Joseph was thinking God sent him as a representative in the land of Egypt. You see the different perspective that they took. And I tell you, if you take the perspective that Joseph is using in his way of understanding of the things that are happening around him in his life, it is only then that you will rise to the challenge. Listen to this. Commonly, human beings, when someone wronged against us, the common thing that we do is we dwell on the mistake that was committed against us. And when we dwell on that mistake, when we dwell on the trouble that was caused in our life, the tendency is that we feel pity on ourselves And on the other hand, we feel so bad about the person who wronged us, and that would develop further, and it will become hatred. Hatred will turn into a grudge. Grudge will cause you to make a revenge. That is the very ugly scenario that would happen when we dwell on the negative things, on the troubles that had happened in our lives. I remember a study. Nowadays, video clips are accepted as an evidence inside a courtroom. I don't know if we have lawyers here or attorneys in our midst tonight. But I read that nowadays video clips are accepted as evidences in the courtroom. And often the judge would study it, look at the video, watch the video very carefully. And one of the things that he needs to see is the intention of the person who has done the murder. If it was a murder, if it was robbery, the judge would try to see the intentions behind, because that's a very key to understanding the whole story. And so, the researchers this time were looking for an answer to a question. And their question was, how will watching a video clip affect the decision making of a judge? How will the viewing or the watching of the video clip affect the judgment of the judge, or the verdict that the judge would give? They gathered some individuals who would play like jurors, like judges, for a study. And then they gave them the scenario. The scenario was like this. There was a man, he had a gun in his hand. He went inside a supermarket, or a convenience store. He went inside a convenience store, and then on the video, in that convenience store, he held his gun and pointed it to the cashier. He was asking for the money, but the cashier refused to give it. And the scenario ended with a murder. And so he killed. That was the scenario related to them verbally. And then the researchers left them to discuss about the matter. So they discussed. Some of them were saying he should be convicted for that. But some of them were saying we should also look at the side, or from the perspective of this murderer. Because if the cashier just gave to him what he needed, then he could have spared his life. It could not have ended with a murder. But since the cashier refused, then that is the reason why he was killed. So they were divided. They were taking different perspectives. After a few minutes, the researchers went back and presented to them a video clip. They watched the video clip at a normal speed. And then after watching, nothing has changed in their decision, and nothing has changed with the way they discussed the matter. Nothing has changed. The researchers came back, and this time, they gave them a video clip not in a normal speed. It was in a slow motion. So now, yung kanina, panonoorin nila at a normal speed, walang nagbago sa decision nila. Now, they watched a slow motion version of the video clip. As they were watching it, they were looking at the scenarios now in a more intense way, wherein they can see time frames in a slower changes. As the video clip moves slowly, they were able to see some details that they weren't able to see earlier. And they saw it. At the end of it, they said, all of them unanimously, they said, this murderer must be convicted. All of them now gave a conclusion that he should be convicted. What changed their mind? The key is when they saw the details of the video in that slow-mo form. But as I was looking at that scenario, I said, this is a reality in each person's life. When someone wronged against us, the tendency is we look at the moment and we slow-mo it in our brain. How he punched you, how he said those words against you. You are ugly. It's gonna be repeatedly thought in your mind. It's gonna dictate your perception. It's gonna dictate your judgment. And so when you dwell in that kind of scenario, it will develop into anger, to hatred, and now you will seek for a revenge. But Joseph did not follow that path because he had a God-centered judgment. And if you have a God-centered judgment, you can never miss the hands of the sovereign God moving, because you will always choose to see the movement of God's hand rather than choosing to see the pain that you had in the tragedy. And listen, when Joseph's brothers gathered around him, they were all thinking that Joseph is gonna kill them. They were all thinking that he's gonna take his revenge. But to their surprise, when they were all gathered there, Joseph said, "You meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good." And at the end of the story, you would be able to see siblings gathered together because Joseph has released his forgiveness to those who wrong him. One of the many things that we need to do in life is release forgiveness. But sometimes it is very hard to do that. Why? Because we dwell on the fault. We dwell on those things that hurt us. We dwell on those things that cause the pain deep within us. Unless we choose to see the hand of God moving, forgiveness will be very difficult in a person's life. But when you choose to see and say, "Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was wrong. Yes, that caused me trouble. But in the midst of these troubles, my God is creating something beautiful in my life," then it is only the time that you will be able to rise to the challenge. Listen, many of us are thinking that we are free. There are no chains in our hands. There are no shackles on our feet. But sometimes while we are walking on the streets, we will just find out that there is hatred in our hearts, and that hatred is putting us in prison all the days of our life. Until we release the anger, until we release forgiveness, until we see the hand of God moving and choose to see God at work rather than dwelling on the pain and the trouble that were inflicted in our lives, we will never be able to rise to the challenge. Take the path of Joseph. Take the path of Joseph. We will end with this series with a message of forgiveness, because God desires for you and for me to be freed and to always choose to see the hand of God moving rather than dwelling on the mistakes that were done into our lives. Because if you do that, negative things will follow. If you follow the hands of God, greater things will happen into your life. These three characteristics that Joseph exemplified, I am praying that will be seen in your daily life, in my daily life as well. He lived with a God-centered morality. He lived with a God-centered discernment. And he lived with a God-centered judgment, seeing things from the perspective of the one who created him. With this in our hearts and mind, I release blessings upon every one of you, that the Spirit of God will empower you to display this in your daily life, in your workplace, in your life as a mother, in your life as a father, in your life as an employee, in your life as an employer, in your life as a policeman, as a teacher, as a learner, as a lawyer, whatever your profession may be, whatever role that God has given you in your life, bring these realities in your daily existence. A God-centered morality, a God-centered discernment, and a God-centered judgment. With this, you will certainly rise to the challenge. God bless us all, and good evening.